often initially is confusing. I find this all the time when the sort of more ego-centered drives, and just to be clear, to me, I don't look at ego with any kind of negative connotation. It's just a particular type of consciousness, and it's a particular way of experiencing the world and oneself, you know. So from the ego's point of view, like I said, we're often trying to compensate. But when we start to evolve, when our sense of who we are starts to expand outside of the ego, then we literally come into a more selfless experience of life. Now, when we first do that, it's confusing because all of our old touch points for what purpose is came from an ego consciousness, something that was more self-centered. And so when we move into a kind of new domain, when that energy is no longer the thrust that pushes us through life and achievement and success, we kind of often go through this phase where I find people often feel kind of disoriented. The old purposes and meanings to their life don't seem to be relevant, and yet a new, more selfless, kind of inspired way of living hasn't kind of come online yet. So we almost always go through this, a kind of a limbo between these two ways of being. I think when it does, the deeper purpose, or what you were referring to as the soul purpose, I think it really has to do with it's something that's really innately more selfless. It's almost like at a certain point in our evolution, the only thing that really makes sense and really gives us an inspired kind of feeling about our life is to serve in some way. I think of it as being a benevolent presence in the world. And that can be big things, big projects, you know, bigger overarching kind of ideas or inspirations of how to contribute to the welfare of the planet or welfare to other people. So it can take that form. I think it also takes sort of the day-to-day form also, because I think purpose plays out on both of these domains, a bigger, like over the arch of our life or say a given decade, and then there's purpose as it's playing out in any individual day. And I think that's the kind of selfless purpose that's easier to connect with initially, you know. I always think of it as, what would it be like to act or relate from my own depth, whatever the deepest thing I know is? What would that be like today, or in my next conversation, you know? And I think then we start to plug into a feeling of being, I call it inspiration. That's the word that sort of does it for me. But it's not so self-oriented. It's about a kind of joyful participation in the welfare of others or of the world.